The Edmonton Oilers are still looking to fill a crucial spot on the team, at least according to Bob Stauffer, and Stan Bowman sat down for an interview. I'll talk about that, I'll talk about more, but before I do, please hit that subscribe button. It'll go a long way in helping us have a full season of Oilers coverage on Oilers Digest. First up, let's talk defensemen. The Oilers are still on the lookout for a top four right shot defenseman to partner with Darnell Nurse. Oilers Now's Bob Stauffer reported as such while in Penticton for the Young Stars tournament, and an article from the Hockey News posted over the weekend posed 3 potential targets. Plenty of names have been bandied around in the offseason, and while pulling names that might fit the bill is easy, finding someone who checks all the boxes isn't, and quite frankly, you're just not going to do it. First name on the docket is Rasmus Andersson, who I've talked at length about in a video you can watch through the link in the corner up there. When he's at his best, he's got the offensive upside you want next to a player like Nurse. But there's a pretty significant catch with Andersson, obviously. Calgary is not going to let him go cheaply, especially considering, the fact that Edmonton are unequivocally their biggest rival. You've got Andersson at 2 years at $4.5 million left, and the Oilers are pressed against the cap ceiling. Calgary probably isn't going to retain salary. They've been very, very difficult in teams trying to get them to retain salary over the last little while, and it makes sense, right? Like, they didn't want to retain anything on Chris Tanev. They didn't want to retain anything on Nikita Zadorov, and when you think about it, it makes sense because Calgary's rebuilding. And they're going to want as much salary cap space as possible moving forward. Why do the Flames even need to trade Andersson is the other thing you have to consider. He's 27, which means there's a chance that if he stays, he could be part of the other half of the Flames rebuild. He could be part of the Calgary Flames that are a competitive team eventually. He's young enough. So if they are going to trade Andersson, A, why do you need to? And B, why would you trade him to Edmonton and do the Oilers a massive favor in helping them make the money work in the process? It's that's all to say I put Andersson in a category of trade acquisitions I just call pipe dreams. I'd love it, I just don't see it happening at a reasonable enough price. Plus, is Rasmus Andersson ever going to see top pair minutes with Evan Bouchard on the team? I don't think so. So here's the guy I think makes the most sense for the Edmonton Oilers in trying to fill a Darnell Nurse spot. The partner of Darnell Nurse, of course, on that second pair. And that's Ottawa Senators defenseman Artem Zub. Off the hop, I'll establish this. Obviously, Zub is not Andersson. I don't even think they're in the same universe when it comes to offensive ability. But the Oilers don't need somebody with offensive upside. Zub gets a bad rep at times because he can struggle with the puck on his stick, but what he does very well is defend. He's a steady, pretty no-nonsense guy. He's known for his ability to defend the rush and to defend down low, and that's a pretty big asset, especially for a team like Edmonton, who's looking for somebody who can hold things down while Nurse tries to produce offensively. Between Bouchard, Ekholm, and Nurse, Edmonton have enough offense from the back end. Having Zub be a calm, steady, no-nonsense opposite to the more chaotic game of Darnell Nurse is kind of the yin-yang contrast I think you want for that kind of pairing. Now, the biggest hurdle for me in terms of Artem Zub, like he checks the box in terms of cost of acquisition, chances are wouldn't be too high, and style of player, but Zub's contract isn't great. He's got 3 years left at 4.6 exactly million dollars, but Ottawa and Calgary are in two very different positions. Like I said, Calgary shouldn't have expectations to win, and therefore they aren't going to feel the need to trade Andersson. You're able, if you're Calgary, to hold off until a great deal pops up, but Ottawa are right now $500,000 over the salary cap. They've got 2 players in on PTOs, Nikolai Kulemin and Kalen Addison. If you look at the Sens roster, Zub's money is probably the most expendable. Jake Sanderson, Thomas Chabot, Nick Jensen, and Jacob Bernard-Docker are all capable defensemen. And Jensen, you can say, has kind of been a better version of Zub over the last few seasons. Kalen Addison on a PTO is far from a bad option if they do choose to move Zub and need a replacement for him in the top 6. Ottawa currently only have 1 player retained. It's Jonas Korpisalo, but that means they can still retain on 2 more guys. And as you can see from this cap wages depth chart of the Sens, they've clearly got more right shot D on the roster too. It really makes sense when you look at it from both sides, which you can't say often, save for the fact that the Edmonton Oilers, as of right this second, don't have the salary cap space to make this work. Of course, that might be different if an Evander Kane LTIR situation comes to fruition. Don't also forget that it was not current Ottawa Senators general manager Steve Staios, but their previous one, Pierre Dorion, who signed Zub to this contract. Zub, all that to say, I think he makes the most sense. The cost of acquisition shouldn't be bad. The money's going to be the big hurdle. Neither the Sens nor the Oilers have much wiggle room, but Evander Kane LTIR is the way this would get done if it is going to get done. Edmonton ending up with the salary cap space to bring in Zub. Ottawa doesn't have the need to take money or retain, to take a contract back or retain on Zub. What are they really going to ask? You're shedding a $4.5 million defenseman off a back end that he may or may not be in the top four of. Why wouldn't you make that trade if you don't have the financial reason not to, right? I think a draft pick should get that done if Edmonton's able to free up the cap space to bring him in. Lastly, it's Dante Fabbro. The 26-year-old has been linked to Edmonton for a while now, and for good reason. He's young, he's cheap, it's only $2.5 million on the cap, and he's coming off a really strong year in Nashville. He's not the tailor-made nurse partner in the same way I believe Zub could be, but the cost of acquisition and the cap space are two pretty significant check marks for the Oilers as they're looking for somebody here. Fabbro's only got 1 year on the contract, which means the Preds would likely not balk at retaining money if need be. It would only affect them this coming season, 2024-25. And if you're Edmonton and you're looking for a player who's not going to break the bank, both in terms of salary cap and cost of acquisition, and can contribute on both sides of the ice, I think Fabbro's a great option. The biggest question mark when it comes to the money is Evander Kane. Edmonton could use LTIR to open up the space for a move right now, but of course, if Kane comes back before the end of the season, which is more likely than not given the nature of his injury, the Oilers would be over the cap space and have a problem they need to solve. All right, so now on to part two of today's show. Stan Bowman, the Oilers' newly hired executive, recently sat down with the Athletic's Thomas Drance for a Q&A. This was kind of the first major interview since Bowman's return to the NHL. He was suspended indefinitely for his involvement in the mishandling of the Kyle Beach sexual abuse case while he was in Chicago. Obviously, because of that, there was and still is tons of skepticism around his return, and Bowman knows it. When asked by Drance about how he'd respond to fans who don't think he deserves a second chance, Bowman said, and I quote, "I would say to those fans that it's my job to prove to them and earn their respect over time. It may not come right away, it may not ever come, I accept that. People who are fans of the game and fans of the team, they're entitled to feel the way that they do. It is not for me to tell anybody how to feel." That's kind of the answer you'd expect. It's at least the kind of answer you'd expect. And Bowman went on to say, quote, "All I can do is try to explain the things I've learned and how I want to try and make a positive impact on our organization moving forward." It's the kind of answer you'd expect from somebody whose mistake had such a negative outcome on the victim's life. And whether or not you want Bowman to be in Edmonton, these are going to be the way he answers these questions. It's just a fact. As part of the interview, Bowman also touched on his immediate priorities with the Oilers, specifically in terms of player development and how critical it is to find the right supporting cast to help the team's core, which of course is led by Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. He emphasized the importance of getting younger players to step in key roles, especially with the cap challenges that the Oilers are going to be facing in the next few years. Bowman said, quote, "It's something that you have to put your time into, and these players will take a few years, but your goal in development is to try and shorten that natural development curve. Players are going to improve regardless over the next few years, but we have to accelerate that with some of them to make sure that we have young players coming in. There's no question that in the next few years, the cap is going to be a challenge for us, so we have to be ready to have players step in, whether they're coming from college, the American League, or from junior." That's no doubt something Bowman managed to do previously in his career, specifically with the Chicago Blackhawks. Over the 6 seasons in which Chicago won 3 Stanley Cups between 09-10 and 2014-15, Bowman brought up so many players through the AHL that won cups in Chicago. This list includes, but isn't limited to, Brandon Saad, Nick Leddy, Andrew Shaw, Chris Versteeg, Taivo Teravainen, Corey Crawford, and Brian Bickle. It's a really big plus to be able to reach into the cupboard and always be pulling out a capable player. That's kind of what Bowman had going for him in Chicago, and that's clearly what Bowman wants to build in Edmonton. That's going to be all from me today. Thanks for watching.